let me tell you a bit about Tom. Tom is a Bradford-based storyteller and film producer with a passion to capture real-life, meaningful stories that impact the world. With over 15 years of experience capturing stories globally for charities, corporates and individuals, Tom seeks to uncover the heart of each human story with every project, because sharing our individual journeys and experiences are how we connect, learn, and grow. Tom Harmer, it's fabulous to see you today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, yeah, we have all the kids have got COVID in the last 2 days, so we're kind of in that world.
Oh no.
But we're okay at the moment, so they're all playing PlayStation next door.
Well, oh, Tom, I'm sorry to hear that. Well, it's even more grateful to you for carving out a bit of space in the midst of that to spend with us and be here. And also, you've been helping us this week as well on some of the tech, so we're really grateful to you for stepping in as well on that.
No, it's wonderful what you're doing, Matt. Like it's a great vision, and I just hope this grows and grows. Hey.
Well, Tom, it's really good. I'd love to get into this this vision for filmmaking. You have a lot of experience, and so just thinking as we've talked about it, I'd love to sort of go big picture first of all, sort of hearing about why this is something that you devote time and skills and energy to. So big picture, then thinking about the projects that you've been developing and working on, and then thinking about if anyone is listening now or later on, wants to get into this line of work or is beginning to work in this, already has been going maybe a number of years, but needs just a bit of a help or, practical next steps. We're then going to sort of drill down into the practicalities and details and pick your brains on some of that. So just sort of, going big picture, what's the sort of the background to this? Why did you get into this in the first place? What excited you and energized you?
Yeah, I mean, I did a media degree and I did all sorts of media. So I've done print and I've done websites. And then I worked for a large church in Bradford and got back into kind of filmmaking, which I'd done a little bit at the university. And I think while I was at church, I remember it was a kind of voluntary project. I hadn't been asked to do it. And there was a young kind of lad who had come across the church's path who was probably an outsider to a lot of society. And I told this story, and I remember we played it at a conference. I showed it to the leadership, and I'm like, man, that's amazing. Just this guy's journey of transformation from where he'd been to kind of coming to faith. And we played it at a conference, and just the atmosphere in the room when the story got told, that when you get a hush in a room and people are leaning in and, you feel like something's being communicated and landed. And I think that probably set a fire under my belly probably 15 odd years ago. And I guess my journey over the last 15 years has been fine tuning that and, pointing my life more and more in that direction. And just, I think I love TV and I love film as well. And I love watching films which have meaning and communicate something about humanity. And I'll often find myself with a kind of tear running down my cheek, watching something on TV. And I think it's that I love. So it's the impact of storytelling and filmmaking that I love. It's the impact on a viewer and on an audience is what I'm chasing and hungry for. And to be honest, I guess that's what Jesus did, isn't it? When he came to earth, he spoke in parables. And I think one of the things I've learned over the years is it's really important to find that common ground. When Jesus spoke in parables, he was using language and images and pictures of things that people understood in their world. I forget the guy who was just on, but he was talking about the church can be a very world where we use our own language, and it's alien to most people. And like my daughter's just started skating at a skate park in Leeds. And so she saw something on the Olympics back in the summer. She got a skateboard for her birthday. And then I took her along for the first time a few weeks ago. I'm walking into a brand new environment I have no context of. It's quite daunting. You kind of walked in and we stood and there's all these people skating around us. And I'm like, I don't know what to do, Jules. You just stand on the board and start, and I think, when we're communicating kingdom, I think a lot of people have no reference at all to what God is. They have all these stereotypes of who he is. They have, that's been built up over hundreds, if not thousands of years of a stereotype of who God is and what the church is about. And you know, in the skate park, it took one guy to come over and say, hey, I'm the manager here, like this is how it works. Let me take your daughter and we'll spend 10-15 minutes and then we'll set her off, kind of thing. And you know, we've been going back 3 or 4 weeks now, and she's loving it and feels part of it. And you know, so you know, using common ground, I think is super key for storytelling.
It reminds me of leading a church 11 years, and you know, just you can get so familiar with that terrain and that territory, and you just think, well, people come through the doors, it's very natural, but actually it's not very natural. And I early on I thought, I'm going to go to you know, a bookmakers, and not to place a bet, but just to see how it felt. And it felt, just as you described, very uncomfortable. I didn't know what I was doing. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing. People watching the screen, people writing on slips. There's someone at the counter, and I just thought, you know, try and blend in. So I just, you know, have a look at the screen. But I felt really awkward, and I think it was a good reminder, actually, if you're going into unfamiliar environments, then you know, that is you know, we've got to cater that. We've got to be aware of that. And I think what you're describing is, in terms of communicating, you know, just a communication tool or media that lands with people and speaks the language. And I'm very interested about that moment 15 years ago.
Yeah.
You shared that video of that story of that young man, and just wondered, what was it in that place? What was happening in that place? Because I'm just thinking, why couldn't you have invited him in to come and, you know, and interview him on the stage, for example? What was the difference between sharing the video of him?
I suppose the gift of filmmaking compared with like interviewing, or having a live, I think there's time and place for both, but in a setting like that, or in a setting like where people are at home, and you know, in our case, we put the kids to bed at 9:30. We've got about half an hour of cleaning up, and then half an hour if we want to watch something on TV. You've got this window of time to kind of hold people's attention. And I think the gift of filmmaking and storytelling is that you can edit. I suppose as a filmmaker, you've got this privilege of editing someone's story, and I hold that very gratefully, and as I want to honor someone's story. But I think most people, when I ask them, you know, have you got a story? They'll say, no, I haven't got a story. Like, people don't see their lives as other people see them. And my kind of primary kind of spiritual gifts are kind of craftsmanship and empathy. And so when I chat to someone and hear someone's story, like I feel like I've half lived their life, or I quickly understand where they've come from. And then that craftsmanship gives me the gift to kind of stand back and go, well, let's just shape this into a package that's going to communicate the journey you've been on to someone, and will hold their interest. There's a whole bunch of storytelling techniques that you can use to kind of keep the audience coming through. And, you know, an audience likes to not be told everything. They like to guess. You know, as humanity, we're curious. So this is all learned over the last, you know, I suppose in that 15 years ago, I didn't realize that's what was happening. You know, I just told the story, and I think we're an innate, God is a storytelling God. You know, I think we're an innate storytelling being as a human. We love stories. We communicate with stories. We tell stories down the pub. We tell stories when we chat to our kids, when we're trying to tell them something. You know, it's just a way we communicate. So yeah, in terms of in person, and I suppose it gives a broad audience as well, doesn't it? You know, if you stick something online, you can reach billions ultimately with a story that's kind of packaged and told well in a storytelling format.
The preacher from the States, T.D. Jakes, he said that the filmmakers and storytellers are the speakers and preachers of our generation. And as you referenced earlier on, Tom, that you know, Jesus spoke in parables. He created word pictures for people and pointed to current and contemporary relevant images and used that as a tool to communicate truth and kingdom reality. And I just wondered, you know, in our context, in our contemporary context, we're in a world that's saturated with video and information content. Content is king, and yet how do we make that content stand out? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so. For me, like, I feel like my kind of calling on my storytelling life is fairly narrow, but also broad. Like, I feel like I'm here to communicate people's value and the value of humanity, which I think is what God wants to tell everyone anyway. You know, God wants to communicate how, and that's why he sent his son to earth, kind of thing. But there's a lot of people who are not communicating that value to earth. You know, it's about, you know, cat videos or whatever kind of thing. You know, I think so. So the standout for me is when you can communicate a kind of kingdom truth. And, you know, if God and Jesus and all that is true, which obviously I believe is true, then we are created in God's image. And so when you hear your Father's voice through a film telling you how valuable you are or how precious life is, then my belief is that then that will resonate. I think I when I first started out, or along my storytelling journey, I've been along the journey of like, how can I create a video that's going to lead someone to Jesus? And I think I've kind of put that to one side at the moment. Like, I think there is a time and a place, there are those videos, but coming to Jesus and finding out about Jesus takes a long time, and it's different for every single person. So for me now, like, I feel like I just want to communicate God's heart through storytelling, and God's the master jigsaw puzzler and he's the one who's got the big picture. And so if I can just communicate some of his heart through anything I create, then I feel like that's my job. And, you know, I don't know where that will lead or what I'll do. A really silly example in terms of finding common ground. Before Christmas, my daughter wrote us, we've had some horrendous roadworks in our area for the last 18 months. And it's caused tailbacks for like hours, and people have been ranting about it on Facebook. And my daughter rewrote the song "Do They Know It's Christmas" and talked about Green Gates Junction and all this kind of thing. And
I saw it. It was so good.
And we put it out just before we went up to Scotland for Christmas, and we loaded it up on Facebook in our local. I just wanted to give a bit of joy to our local community. And we put it up before dinner, came back after dinner, and it had like nearly 100 comments, and people like, we need to share this, widen this community. And over the next week, there was like 55,000 views on it, and it went viral and it got on the papers and like, it's crackers. But I think what that's taught me is like, yeah, this is a journey that everyone's been through in the last 18 months through this junction. They've all had to wait and got frustrated, and like, you know, we brought a bit of humor to it all. And so I think, you know, in terms of reaching a wide audience, you've got to find that point of humanity that everyone's journeying through. You know, and we've got this worldwide pandemic at the moment, haven't we? And it's, you know, it's getting people to slow down, it's getting people to analyze who they are and what they want to do in life and all that kind of thing. So there's plenty of opportunities, I think, to communicate on a common ground, and it's just the difference, you know, going back to your original question, I think there's so much content, but if you can communicate God's heart through that content and then let God and the Holy Spirit do the rest, then that's what we should do.
I love it, Tom. I've got all sorts of thoughts going around in my head, but where could people find that video if they wanted to see it later? Is there a link? Maybe you could put it in the chat later on and they can follow it up, because I think it's just such a great example. When I saw it, I thought that this is just this. I'm not surprised that it had so many views and engagements with it, because to tell you what I'm thinking, you know, you've had you know what you described is, you originally were sharing stories to point people to Jesus, but I think what we've discovered is that it's a process, isn't it? It's a process. As you said, God is the master, you know, storyteller. He's got the big picture. And we play a small part in people's stories. He invites us and involves us in people's stories, that, you know, bringing them to faith in Jesus. And so it slightly takes the pressure off us, because it was always God's work anyway, but he invites us to have a play. But if you see it as a sort of a journey, as a process, and we maybe play a little part in someone's journey to faith, it means that you can, you know, see yourself playing a part in at any point in that spectrum, whether it's, you know, way back before coming to faith, or at that moment of coming to faith, or even after coming to faith, we get to play a part. And what you described is being present with kingdom, you know, kingdom truth, the reality of Jesus in a particular moment, and a particular almost landing point in people's lives. The roadworks in your area were almost an openness, you know, a common theme that created openness for you to proclaim, you know, and to be present in that place. And it just reminds me of St. Paul in Colossians, he talks about pray that, you know, God would open a door of opportunity for the gospel. And it just reminds me of this, that these opportunities, these common ground places are, you know, great places for us to be present as salt and light, to bring truth at some point in that spectrum.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, if we'd gone into that Green Gates song and found the common ground and just, you know, tried to point people to Jesus, like it wouldn't have found traction because people don't, they'd be like, sack that. I'm not going to watch that. I'm not going to share that. But in the video, like, I believe that there is an element of God in that, because we are children of God and we follow him. And so the element of kind of having the funny side of looking at life and, you know, making light of it, and I suppose in a way saying, actually, this isn't the be all end. I know there's a lot of frustration that's happening in that junction, but come on, guys, there's more to life than that kind of thing. And you know, yeah, I don't know. And I think, like, over the years, like, I've, you know, worked at kind of in churches, and you kind of, it's like, how can we get people through the doors kind of thing. And I think over the years I've been like, well, actually, how can I just point people to Jesus, you know, and you know, the church can be this whiz bang place, and people can come through the doors for the whiz bang, but then that won't hold them when they get through struggles. So, you know, in terms of created in God's image and heart, you want to point people to the Father, and that's why you want them to lock into an anchor. Or I forget I used to be in the boys' brigade when I was younger, and there was the kind of verse about it's an anchor for my soul, and that's what we want to give people through the content. We want people to anchor themselves in the Father and in Jesus, and then find community within church or online or things like this.
And so, just before we move into the sort of the next section of the projects and particular work that you've been spending your time on, where would you say, you know, in terms of your own vision for this? I think you might have mentioned earlier, but how would you sort of summarize what it is that drives you forward in the work that you do?
Yeah, it's that value, I think. So I did a little. My mother-in-law actually teaches people on authentic confidence, and part of that course that she does, she's got something called the onion model, and the onion model is all about kind of pulling back layers of what you're passionate about in life. And so you start off with what you're passionate about in life, and then there's a series of 2 questions which you repeat until you kind of get to the core of who you are. So I started on the outside of my onion as, you know, I love filmmaking and storytelling, and went down, and it's kind of quite hard because you're kind of uncovering these layers of what actually drives your passion. And when I got to the bottom, it was just, I wanted to create to tell people how valuable they are, and I suppose that is, and you kind of, then that gives you a way to kind of almost step back from life and have a in a way a God's eye view of your life, and you can kind of realize why you got passionate about certain things in life, or why you why something kind of lights a fire under your belly, or why you're drawn to certain things in life. And when you can see that, you know, I just love telling people how valuable they are. And I think, you know, I mentioned earlier that's quite narrow, but it's also quite broad. You know, in the past I've been quite narrow about where I wanted my life to go, and I'm now quite open, and I'm open for God to kind of take me in different areas. Like, I've told some stories for our local city council, Bradford Council, in the last year, and none of them have got a kingdom agenda. You know, it's a project to bring the city together and to share our humanity and see that we're all the same. But as a writer, as an editor, like, I can kind of put those kingdom principles into the writing without being obvious. You know, I can share people's value through that storytelling, and yeah, so I'm quite open to where God's going to take me, and I just know it's about value.
It's wonderful, Tom. I'd love it if you could tell us about some of the projects you've already worked on, and what's inspired you about them, what you've learned through them, and then maybe we can talk about some of the things that you're going to be working on, things that you've got your sights on coming up. But thinking about, you know, what you have already worked on.
Yeah, so I used to work for Hope for Justice, which is an anti-trafficking charity. Got to travel a little bit with them, and that was, in terms of value, like, that's obviously this huge amount of value of people who are locked behind closed doors in slavery kind of thing. And so a lot of what I was doing was to help bring people on the vision and the mission by sharing stories. When you hear of what someone's gone through, then you want to our God-given humanity wants us to help people. Compassion, empathy. I've worked for a large church in Bradford. I've done a bit of corporate stuff, and I've been working for a large German speaker manufacturer for the last year, and they actually produce loudspeakers for like the Royal Albert Hall and all those like top end Coldplay, all those kind of guys. But the project that I've been working on is to do with the church world. So it's essentially selling speakers into the church world, but it's all about kind of clear communication. And when we have a conversation one-to-one, there's this kind of intimacy about it, which can be lost in a church building. So their passion as an organization is to help that, whatever you're passionate about and that intimacy, they want to create that. And they've got these top end speakers so that when someone like that young lad came into a church, and if he sat on the back row, he would feel like he's having a conversation with the pastor one-on-one kind of thing. So I've quite enjoyed that. Like I hadn't expected that, but I'm quite open to it, and I've enjoyed that. Actually, I can use storytelling and the kingdom stuff. And then a personal project that started at the start of the pandemic was something called 52 Humans. And that came out of frustration, really. Like, I'm a storyteller. My clients weren't asking me to tell stories. My car had broken down, and I was like, sack this, what am I going to do? And kind of came up with this idea of trying to tell 52 stories about humanity in 1 year, so one a week for a year. I managed to get to 37 in the year. It was quite a relentless schedule, but absolutely loved it. And it really kind of lit my soul on fire, and absolutely loved the kind of half the people had faith, half the people didn't have faith, but found a real resonance because I was talking about humanity, and because I had that kind of edited view of, let's see if we can bring God's fingerprint in each person's life to the top of the storytelling. I think that's what resonated in people. It was just quite heartwarming, I suppose, the content. It was quite inspiring, and I think that's what God wants to see, the best in everyone. And I think when you see the best in someone else, it can be inspiring. You can either go, oh, I'm never going to be like them, or it can kind of pull you up. So for me, the 52 Humans project was great, and I loved it. And again, that kind of built as it went, and ended up getting interviewed on the local radio for that stuff. So
what has been some of the feedback from the people who watched those 52 Humans videos? What have you had, any particular feedback or any insights as people have watched it? What have you learned about the way people are interacting?
Yeah, one was a story about wild swimming, and I'd been down to see my sister, who in Malvern, and she, I think the day before I came down, said, "Oh, I've got my friend who's really into wild swimming. Would you like to interview her?" So I kind of they went wild swimming while I was down there, and I just interviewed her. And she talked about, she's a mum with 3 kids, a busy world, and for her, wild swimming is this almost like place to be herself and to escape the chaos of the demand of life kind of thing. And she talked about how the water enveloped her, and she felt consumed, and you can feel life, and just how important that was for her as a woman, and as an individual. And just the feedback was like, gosh, like you nailed it kind of thing. That's what I feel when I go wild swimming. And people who don't go wild swimming were like, I need that in my life. I really want to find something like that. Had a really beautiful exchange. My cousin married a farmer. He's up in Dumfries in Scotland, and while we were up on holiday, I interviewed him. And he's one of these gems in life. He's got so much kind of earthly wisdom, I suppose. Like, he's not in the city life. He's got 800 years of farming history behind him. And for him, the land and the animals is who he's meant to be. And he talked about, it was I think less than 3-minute video. Managed to shoot some beautiful shots, but he talked about this kind of connection. And when he's standing on top of his farm and looking out, he feels his place in the world kind of thing. Didn't mention God at all. He is a Christian. And then about 5 days later, he said this old 70-odd-year-old guy walked up his lane and stopped him and said, "I saw you." And that video went viral amongst the kind of farming community. And this 75-year-old had somehow seen it through Facebook or whatever, came up and said, "Look, I saw your video," and like, it was really special. can I ask you a question? Like, you know, you talked about finding your place in the world, and like, is that God? And Michael, the farmer, just said, yeah, it is. And the 75-year-old was just walked away, tears streaming down his face, and that's it.
Wow.
Don't know what happened after that.
Wow.
So,
wow.
Yeah, there's I think I'm learning that you don't have to be explicit in talking about God. You just have to talk about who we are as humans, and what journey we've gone on, and how we're all trying to find our place in the world, and God wants us to find it with him.
It's fabulous just to hear some of that, Tom. You know, you painted two different pictures. The comedy video of you and your daughters in the car in the traffic jam, all the way through to the 52 humans and the stories. And I mean, absolutely wonderful just to hear, you know, the power of media, not just in terms of engaging with people, opening people's lives up to, you know, hearing from God, even though they may not even say it in those words, being impacted by the Holy Spirit, meeting Jesus ultimately, you know, but also, you know, just the reach, as you said earlier, potentially billions of people could access this, no longer limited by just a physical location. And as we heard earlier in the session, the metaverse, you know, that opens up all sorts of possibilities, doesn't it? Okay, so Tom, love to know, you know, just moving to the next section, thinking about people who are, you know, maybe just starting out. They maybe over the last couple of years, I'm just convinced the last couple of years we've been disrupted in different ways. Obviously, it's been challenging, but I know that there'll be a raft of people who've had an opportunity to, you know, to review what they spend their time on. And I'm convinced there'll be a load of people that, you know, just filmmaking, storytelling has been something that God has been speaking to them about, and maybe they had an opportunity to just give it a bit more time over the last couple of years, or even just you know, recognize that and name that as something that God's been speaking to them about. And I'd love, you know, love us to hear from you. If someone was just stepping out into this arena, into this, you know, forum of making films, sharing stories. You talked about having a media degree. Is it important to have some formal training, or can you teach yourself? What advice would you give to people?
No, I think, like, in terms of degree, absolutely not. Like, like, it was great experience for me, but it's not taught me what I know now. Like, I think a filmmaker, I've had to do a lot of self-teaching, and I still do. Like, I'm always trying to learn, and I think that hunger to expand and learn. Obviously, you need to understand kit and technology and all that kind of thing. But if that's not your bag, then find someone who does. And there's a lot of geeks out there who love technology. So to kind of team up with someone like that. If your passion is storytelling, but you don't really understand kit, then team up with someone. I guess I'm able to do both. I can geek on some stuff, but like I said earlier, my passion is the impact of the storytelling. I think biggest piece of advice is to kind of know yourself. Spend a bit of time figuring out who God's created you to be. Like, my journey has, you know, the last 8 years has been, I think, a big pivotal moment is me having confidence in the voice that God's given me for the world, kind of thing. And that has enabled me to kind of step out in confidence and create content and not really care about the response. I used to care what people thought about what I created. Obviously I still do, but I'm not hanging on people's response anymore. I'm hanging on, let's create something that I feel that's got God's voice in it. And then, you know, I talked about, like, I want to communicate humanity's value. Like, that's been key, like, in how I create. But the other thing is just go and create stuff. Like, the best way to learn is to just do it. And, you know, if you want to start out by sharing with friends and mates and seeing how they get and asking for feedback, like my daughter's plays football, and she's kind of going through this kind of confidence crisis at the moment. She's like, what if I make a mistake on the pitch, or what if they score, or kind of thing. And I'm trying to encourage her to actually, you just need to do what you love. And if you make a mistake, that's fine. You're just going to learn through that kind of thing. And I think that fear of making mistakes or not doing what you meant to do can hold us back a lot of the time. So it's just know who you are, know who the voice God's given you, be confident in that. Like, we've each got our voice. It doesn't have to be the speakers or the church leaders or the kind of life group leader. It's you've got a unique voice for this world. Find that voice and be confident in that voice, because God's given it you to tell the world.
It's great, Tom. And just maybe final question, just any resources that you found helpful, videos or books that have been really helpful in your own journey, people that you look out for that inspire you on, what would you say to help people, think about following up this further?
Yeah, I mean, so a few years ago, I spent a lot of time, I had to go writing a TV drama, like in terms of like wanting to reach a bigger audience. And like, there's this book here, you can't see it, John York, Into the Woods. So he used to be head of drama for Channel 4, and he's kind of deconstructed how story works and how you can structure it. So that helped a lot in my structure. But beyond that, I think I do look out for other things and do get inspired. But I think over the years, I've moved away from looking externally to finding it internally. And so when I create something, like if it makes my heart sing, and if I find a tear coming down my cheek, then I know I'm on to something.
Oh, Tom, it really is wonderful to chat with you. If people want to follow up with you and connect with you, where can we point them?
Yeah, I suppose tomharmer.co.uk, and that's got my social media stuff on there as well. So HARMER, Tom Harmer, at Tom Harmer on social media stuff.
Oh, it's good stuff. Tom, this is Tom Harmer, everyone. Please do connect with him. Thank you, Tom, for giving us some time, and looking forward to connecting with you again soon. Yeah. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, cheers, Matt.